The women love it. When they saw me load it all up and come here, they were like, whew. So that was the reason.
Phil Robertson, a rugged, no-nonsense outdoorsman, best known as the bearded patriarch of Duck Dynasty, the hit reality TV show. With a net worth of around $15 million, Phil built an empire from the Louisiana woods, fueled by faith, family, and a fiercely independent spirit. Let's take a look at where he is today, starting with the home he built, the wheels he drives, and the rugged luxury that surrounds him. Phil Robertson may be a multi-millionaire, but his home is far from what you'd expect from a celebrity. Tucked away in the woods of West Monroe, Louisiana, Phil's house is a large, rustic cabin surrounded by acres of land. It's built for simplicity and function, crafted mainly from wood, with exposed log beams, a spacious porch, and a cozy lived-in interior. While fans online may refer to it as a mansion, it's more of a hunter's lodge than a luxury estate. There's no marble flooring or sleek modern design, just open space, natural materials, and peace. The property itself is massive, featuring lakes, wooded trails, and hunting spots, including duck blinds and deer stands. The home is likely worth over $500,000, but it blends seamlessly into the wilderness around it. And when it comes to cars, Phil's collection is as rugged and practical as he is. He's known for driving old-school pickup trucks, mostly Chevys and Fords from the 70s and 80s. These trucks are reliable, tough, and built for muddy back roads and hauling gear during hunting season. He's also got a range of off-road vehicles like ATVs and side-by-sides, perfect for navigating the dense woods and swampy terrain around his property.
When you walk out of where all our stuff is, you come back in here. We get a little air conditioning back in here for summertime, heat.
Family car wash. But to truly understand how far he's come, we need to rewind the clock, back to the day he was born in the quiet woods of Louisiana. Phil Alexander Robertson was born on April 24, 1946, in the tiny town of Vivian, Louisiana. From the moment he arrived, Phil's life was shaped by hardship, simplicity, and a kind of raw freedom that few today can even imagine. Phil grew up with 6 siblings, and every day was a lesson in survival, teamwork, and faith. Growing up in the deep woods of Louisiana during the 1950s and 60s, young Phil Robertson didn't have toys or television. If the family wanted meat on the table, someone had to bring it home. And more often, that someone was Phil. But there was more to him than just survival skills. Phil had raw athletic talent that couldn't be ignored. At North Caddo High School, he was the star quarterback. Tall, tough, and fiercely competitive, he quickly became a hometown hero on the football field. Duck Commander lost tape. That grit on the field and in the woods would eventually take him to college. But what followed was a storm of fame, temptation, and choices that nearly unraveled everything. In the 1960s, Phil earned a scholarship to Louisiana Tech University, where he stepped into the spotlight as the starting quarterback. What made this even more interesting was the fact that he was starting ahead of none other than Terry Bradshaw, who would go on to become an NFL legend and Hall of Famer. But while Bradshaw had visions of Super Bowl rings, Phil had a very different vision for his life. He was a natural athlete, undeniably talented, fast, strong, and with a cannon for an arm. But despite his abilities, football wasn't his ultimate passion. When the NFL came knocking, Phil turned it down, much to the surprise of many. Terry Bradshaw later told the press that Phil would often show up to games looking like he had just stepped out of a hunting trip. His shirt stained with duck blood, squirrel guts, and whatever else came with a day out in the wild. Terry also spoke about how talented Phil was, mentioning that not only was he an incredible quarterback, but he was faster than most of the players around him, including Terry himself. Phil had raw talent that couldn't be denied, but he wasn't interested in fame or the NFL dream. What he wanted was a shotgun in his hands, a duck blind at sunrise, and the freedom of the wild. But behind all the talent, this was also the period of his life when Phil spiraled into what he later described as the darkest time he'd ever experienced. He got caught up in drinking, partying, and infidelity, slowly drifting away from the values he was raised with. Terry Bradshaw interview. Football days. In the midst of all that chaos, there was one steady hand in his life, Miss K. Then, in 1966, at just 20 years old, Phil Robertson married his high school sweetheart, Marcia K. Caraway, better known to the world as Miss K. She was the steady hand behind the wild spirit, full of patience, faith, and quiet strength. Early in their marriage, things were far from perfect. Phil's drinking, anger, and reckless living living took a toll. He was distant, often absent, and at times destructive. But Kay never gave up on him. Dark days. But even love has its limits. Phil's demons caught up with him, and before he could rebuild, he had to lose everything. By the early 1970s, Phil Robertson's life had spiraled completely out of control. He'd walked away from everything: his wife, his kids, his responsibilities. He was living out of a bar, picking fights, drinking heavily, and drifting through each day with no direction and no peace. In 1975, something shifted. Phil became a born-again Christian, and that single decision would change the course of his life forever. He left the chaos behind and returned to the values he was raised with: faith, family, and purpose. He went back to Kay, reunited with his children, and began walking a new path. Preaching, studying the Bible, and living with conviction became his new focus. Out of that brokenness came purpose, and from that purpose came an idea: a duck call so good it would change his life forever. In 1972, Phil Robertson took a bold step that would unknowingly shape his legacy forever. Frustrated with the poor quality of store-bought duck calls, he decided to craft his own, one that actually mimicked the real sound of a duck. What started as a personal project quickly became something much bigger. With grit, patience, and a deep understanding of the hunt, Phil created the very first Duck Commander duck call. At first, it was just him in a small workshop, hand-making each call by himself. No fancy tools, no business degree, just a man with a mission to make something better, and it worked. Word started to spread among serious hunters. Phil's duck calls were game-changing, realistic, durable, and made by a man who truly lived the hunting lifestyle. The business grew slowly, one call at a time, fueled by word of mouth and his growing presence at outdoor trade shows. He wasn't in it for fame or fortune, he just wanted to provide something honest and effective to people like him. What began as a small homemade operation in rural Louisiana was quickly gaining traction. Duck Commander was a reflection of Phil's values: hard work, authenticity, and living close to the land. And without even realizing it, he was laying the foundation for a multi-million-dollar empire that would one day be run by his own family. Blowing duck call, Duck Commander, Original Commander, Call. As the duck calls started flying off the shelves, Phil was raising boys into men and building a legacy. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Phil Robertson was raising his 4 sons deep in the Louisiana woods, far from the noise of modern life. Alan, Jace, Willie, and Jep grew up the same way Phil had: hunting, fishing, working with their hands, and living close to nature. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Meanwhile, Duck Commander slowly evolved from a backyard operation into a recognizable name among hunters. Phil started filming his own hunting adventures, raw, unfiltered footage of real hunts in the swamp. He sold the VHS tapes alongside his duck calls, creating not just a product, but a lifestyle that resonated with outdoorsmen across the country. But the real shift came when his son Willie stepped in. While the rest of the family loved the hunt, Willie had a sharp eye for business. He saw the potential in what his father had built and knew how to take it to the next level. Under Willie's leadership, Duck Commander transformed from a niche hunting brand into a multi-million-dollar empire. He modernized the business, expanded distribution, and began building the groundwork for what would eventually become a household name: Duck Commander. That legacy eventually found its way to national television, where the world met the Robertsons in all their bearded, backwoods glory. In 2012, Duck Dynasty exploded onto A&E, and no one saw it coming. What began as a reality show about a quirky Louisiana family who made duck calls turned into a cultural phenomenon. Within weeks, the Robertson family went from backwoods business owners to full-blown TV stars. But Duck Dynasty struck a deep chord with viewers across the country. At a time when most reality TV was built on drama and excess, Duck Dynasty offered something completely different: family dinners, prayer, life lessons, and plenty of down-home humor. With his weathered wisdom and no-nonsense outlook, he brought a grounded presence to the screen. He spoke plainly and reminded viewers that life was about more than money or fame. At its peak, Duck Dynasty drew over 11 million viewers per episode, making it the most-watched non-fiction cable series in history at the time. Duck Dynasty Season 1. But fame always comes with a price, and for Phil, it came in the form of public backlash and a spotlight on his deeply held beliefs. In late 2013, Phil Robertson found himself at the center of a national firestorm. During an interview with GQ magazine, he made blunt remarks about homosexuality, sin, and race, views rooted in his conservative Christian beliefs. The comments sparked immediate backlash, with critics accusing him of being offensive and out of touch. A&E, the network behind Duck Dynasty, responded by suspending him from the show. But the move triggered an even bigger reaction. Millions of fans rallied behind Phil, viewing the suspension as an attack on free speech and religious conviction. Social media lit up with hashtags like #IStandWithPhil. Petitions were launched, and public figures across politics and media chimed in with support. Within just over a week, A&E lifted the suspension and reinstated Phil without any long-term penalties. The incident drew a clear line in the sand, turning Phil from a quirky TV personality into a symbol of something much larger. To his supporters, he became a voice for traditional values and religious freedom. To his critics, he represented intolerance under the guise of faith. Either way, the controversy cemented his role as more than just a reality TV star. GQ comment: A&E suspension. Rather than back down, Phil doubled down, using his voice to preach, write, and speak boldly about the faith that changed his life. As Duck Dynasty grew in popularity, Phil Robertson's influence expanded beyond television. In 2013, he released his first book, Happy, Happy, Happy: My Life and Legacy as the Duck Commander. The memoir became a bestseller. Then, in 2014, Phil followed up with Unfiltered: The Way I See It, which was even more candid and unapologetic. And in 2019, Phil released The Theft of America's Soul, where he addressed what he saw as the decline of American values, particularly in relation to faith and the country's cultural shift. In addition to his books, Phil continued to use his voice through the launch of the Unashamed podcast. Along with his sons, he discussed everything from biblical teachings to politics and current events. And just when he thought he'd seen it all, another chapter opened. A daughter he never knew he had stepped into his life, rewriting the meaning of family once again. In 2020, Phil Robertson's life took an unexpected turn when a DNA test revealed that he had an adult daughter, Phyllis, from a past affair before he became a Christian. The revelation came through a letter sent to him by Phyllis, who had been searching for her biological father. Despite the shock and complexity of the situation, Phil embraced the news with the same authenticity and commitment to family that had defined his life after his conversion. Phyllis soon became a part of the Robertson family dynamic. She appeared on the Unashamed podcast, sharing her story and bonding with Phil and his sons. But life has a way of testing even the strongest souls. In 2024, the Robertson family shared that Phil had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The news was a heavy blow, but true to his nature, Phil faced the diagnosis with the same fortitude and faith that had carried him through so much already. Despite the challenges posed by the disease, Phil has continued to remain active. He's still preaching, still sharing his thoughts on faith, and still podcasting with his sons on Unashamed. The family continues to rally around him, and his large, tight-knit clan has become even more integral to his life in this new chapter. Even now, surrounded by grandkids, gospel, and the great outdoors, he's living proof that you don't need luxury to live richly. You just need purpose, and maybe a good duck call. What part of Phil Robertson's journey surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe and stay tuned so you don't miss out on more interesting ventures.